Imagine a plant so resilient it thrives in conditions that would destroy a commercial blueberry crop overnight. It shrugs off temperatures as low as -40 degrees, flourishes in clay-heavy swamps, and grows in the roadside ditches that modern agriculture usually writes off as wastelands. But this isn't just a tough shrub. It produces a native North American fruit with antioxidant levels that shatter the records of almost every other berry found on this continent, sometimes testing 4 times higher than the superfoods we see in grocery stores. For hundreds of years, this berry was the thin line between life and death during famines, wars, and brutal winters. Elders kept it in leather pouches because it refused to spoil. Children relied on it when the corn crops failed and the deer disappeared. And yet in the span of a single generation, we erased it. We pulled it out of our diets, demoted it to a decorative landscaping bush, and pretended it wasn't food. Why? Not because it was toxic or weak, but simply because it wasn't sweet enough for the modern sugar-addicted palate. It made people too independent. Today, nearly everyone walks past this plant without realizing they are ignoring one of the most potent fuel sources their ancestors ever possessed. By the time we finish today, you will know exactly how to spot it hiding in plain sight, why science confirms it humiliates the modern blueberry, and why a quiet movement of growers is bringing it back before the next food crisis hits. But to understand its power, we have to look back at a winter so deadly it nearly wiped out a civilization, and the one plant that refused to let them fade away. Call to action. If you are tired of being misled by the industrial food system, drop a fire emoji in the comments. And if you're ready to uncover the secrets they buried, hit that like button. Welcome back to the channel where we resurrect the survival foods our ancestors bet their lives on, crops that nature designed to last. If you believe true food security starts with plants that survived hell long before supermarkets existed, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. These are the stories that disappear when we stop telling them. Let's dig into the archives. The historical encounter. Picture the tail end of a harsh winter. French explorers are navigating a narrow trail, led by Ojibwe hunters. As they push through the brush, the explorers notice something strange: dense shrubs, heavy with dark, almost black berries covered in a protective purple wax. The Ojibwe guides stop without hesitation. They harvest the fruit and eat it with the calm confidence of someone greeting an old friend. Some eat the berries fresh, others pull out pressed cakes of dried fruit meant to last through the season. The Frenchmen hesitate. To their eyes, the dark color and unfamiliar look suggest danger as much as nourishment. But curiosity wins out. One explorer places a berry on his tongue and bites down. The reaction is immediate. It isn't a burst of sweetness. It is a sharp, mouth-drying astringency that sucks the moisture right out of his mouth, followed by a deep, earthy flavor. It wasn't comfort food. It was endurance food. In that moment, the Europeans realized what the indigenous guides already knew. This was not a berry for leisure. It was a berry for survival. Cultural significance. Among tribes like the Potawatomi, Winnebago, Menominee, and Ojibwe, this plant was far more than a snack. It was a combination of food, medicine, and insurance. The names they gave it reflected its power. The Potawatomi called it sakweo, referencing the mouth-drying effect of the tannins that preserved the fruit. The Ojibwe knew it as the dark berry of winter strength, honoring its role as a guardian during the freezing months. This berry, known today as Aronia, was never eaten casually. It was a strategic resource. Families sun-dried the fruit and pressed it into dense energy cakes that could last for months without rotting. Hunters mixed the berries with bison or venison fat to create early versions of pemmican, the ultimate survival ration for long journeys. Healers utilized the berry's natural tannins to treat colds, reduce inflammation, and settle stomachs, utilizing medicinal compounds long before modern science gave them names like polyphenols. Most importantly, Aronia was winter insurance. When deep snows made hunting unpredictable and fresh greens were a distant memory, these dried berries remained potent, providing the essential nutrients to carry families safely through to spring. The biology of a tank. The Aronia shrub is unassuming, growing low to the ground, usually 3 to 8 feet tall, forming thickets in wetlands and on the edges of northern forests. It doesn't brag with massive fruit or sugary scents. It waits. Biologically, it is a tank. While commercial crops collapse under stress, Aronia endures. It handles drought, flooding, and nutrient-poor soil. It withstands temperatures of -40 Fahrenheit. It is self-pollinating and naturally resistant to pests thanks to its chemical makeup. Inside the fruit, the stats are staggering. Aronia berries contain record-breaking concentrations of anthocyanins, which provide that dark color, and procyanidins that protect cells from stress. In lab tests, Aronia consistently outperforms blackberries, elderberries, and blueberries in antioxidant capacity. It is loaded with vitamin C, manganese, and compounds that support heart health. Nature didn't design Aronia to be sweet, it designed it to keep you alive. For those living off the land, this durability was life-saving. Oral histories from the Great Lakes region speak of starvation winters where fishing failed and game vanished. In those times, families survived on the dried Aronia cakes they had stored for exactly that scenario. These cakes didn't mold or lose their potency, they were pure caloric and medicinal security. In the 1700s, French voyageurs, fur traders adopted this wisdom. Their lives were grueling, involving weeks of paddling and hauling canoes over frozen land. They needed food that wouldn't spoil. They relied on pemmican spiked with dried Aronia. The berries preserved the meat and provided slow-burning energy. When settlers eventually pushed west in the 1800s, they quickly learned the value of this shrub. Many homesteaders planted Aronia near their cabins, not as a luxury, but as a backup plan for when the frost killed their other crops. The unbeatable yield and the fatal flaw. While delicate orchard trees snap in storms or wither in poor soil, Aronia does something different. It simply waits. It offers a reliable harvest year after year. Berries that can be eaten fresh, dried into rations, or cooked down into preserves that last through the longest winters. For indigenous tribes, fur traders, and early pioneers, this plant wasn't just scenery, it was the dividing line between starving and surviving. When you look at the agricultural data, the story moves from impressive to almost unbelievable. An acre of Aronia bushes left virtually alone can pump out between 7,000 and 12,000 pounds of fruit every single year. That is a massive yield achieved with zero irrigation, zero synthetic fertilizers, and zero pesticides. These shrubs rival the output of commercial blueberry farms, yet they require a tiny fraction of the labor and cost. Nutritional dominance. But the real shock isn't just the quantity, it's the quality. When we break down the chemistry, Aronia is in a league of its own. Per 100 grams, Aronia boasts an antioxidant capacity 3 to 6 times higher than blueberries. And it's not just one type of compound. It contains a wider spectrum of polyphenols than cranberries, blackberries, and elderberries combined. It is arguably the densest source of protective plant compounds on the North American continent. The anthocyanins, the pigments that turn the berry nearly black, are some of the highest levels ever recorded in fruit. These aren't just colors, they are biochemical armor designed to neutralize oxidative stress in the human body. Beyond the antioxidants, Aronia is packed with fiber, far more than most common fruits, which helps regulate blood sugar and feeds the gut biome. It also contains compounds proven to support flexible blood vessels and boost nitric oxide production, a key factor in heart health. These aren't old wives' tales, these are facts backed by modern clinical research. So why isn't it in every grocery store? The problem with perfection. Blueberries offer sweetness, Aronia offers strength. In an era of dying soil and climate instability, this is the perfect crop for the future. But in the modern marketplace, Aronia had a serious problem. Its flaw was its flavor. While the berry is complex and incredibly nutritious, it is also intensely astringent. If you eat a raw Aronia berry, your mouth dries out in seconds. This is due to the massive tannin content. The very thing that protects the fruit from rot also makes it challenging to eat. While strawberries and blueberries provide instant sugary gratification, Aronia demands effort. You have to process it. You have to understand it. Early settlers who didn't know the indigenous methods of drying or mixing it with fat found it too harsh. Without that cultural knowledge, many dismissed it as inedible. The supermarket shift. By the 20th century, the industrial food system sealed Aronia's fate. Grocery stores wanted fruit that tasted like candy. Farmers wanted crops they could market as sweet, juicy, and ready to eat. Aronia was none of those things. It was storage-stable, disease-resistant, and high-yielding, but it didn't fit the flavor profile of the new consumer economy. It lacked snack appeal. Industrial agriculture couldn't figure out how to sell a berry that required an explanation or a recipe. In a world rushing toward convenience and sugar, Aronia was too honest, too plain, and too real. It refused to act like dessert, so it was pushed aside. The rise of sweetness. As the 1900s progressed, the fruit hierarchy changed. Blueberries, once wild forage, were domesticated into sweet, plump cash crops. Cranberries cornered the market on tartness, thanks to massive sugar subsidies and holiday marketing. Grapes dominated the juice aisle. Meanwhile, Aronia, quiet, tough, and medically superior, was pushed to the fringe. Its astringency was a marketing nightmare. You can't write a catchy slogan for a dry mouth. Fruit had become entertainment, not fuel. Nurseries stopped stocking it. Farm bulletins stopped discussing it. Home gardeners forgot it existed. The one berry that could have anchored a low-input, climate-resilient agriculture system faded into the background. There was another, more human reason for its disappearance. In many rural areas, the taste of Aronia became linked to bad memories. During the hardest years of frontier life, when the harvest failed and the pantry was bare, Aronia was the desperation food. It was the only thing left on the bush when everything else had died. It was the food that kept hunger away when the money ran out. Because of this, a generation of children grew up associating that dry, bitter taste with poverty and fear. Parents who had survived on it swore they would never feed it to their own families if they could afford better. As prosperity returned and sweeter fruits became available, Aronia was abandoned, not because it wasn't valuable, but because it reminded people of the struggles they desperately wanted to forget. I have synthesized the scientific data, the historical context of other forgotten crops, and the closing call to action into a powerful, cohesive conclusion: the rediscovery and the future of food. The cultural amnesia. In a society obsessed with progress, these hard memories were quietly locked away. Aronia didn't just disappear from our farms, it disappeared from our identity. The knowledge stopped being passed down. The erasure wasn't because the plant was useless, it was because of what it represented. A berry once linked to resilience became linked to suffering, so we turned our backs on it, leaving one of the continent's most potent fruits to be forgotten beneath the weight of its own brilliance. Science unlocks the code. But in the late 20th century, the script flipped. Researchers in Poland, Russia, the Baltic states, and eventually the US began looking at Aronia not as a relic, but as a biological puzzle. They wanted to know how a plant could survive such harsh environments without changing for centuries. When the lab results came in, the scientific community was stunned. Aronia displayed the strongest anti-inflammatory effects of any berry tested, beating out elderberries and blueberries in lab models. It showed a massive capacity to lower blood pressure, strengthen arterial walls, and improve vascular flexibility. Crucially, studies found it helps regulate blood sugar, making it one of the rare fruits that actively supports metabolic balance rather than spiking insulin. Its antioxidant profile protected cells from damage far better than the sweet fruits stocking our shelves. The immune-boosting compounds that indigenous healers used intuitively were finally proven to activate the body's natural defense pathways. The European irony: Eastern Europe didn't wait. Poland and the Baltics began cultivating Aronia on an industrial scale, turning it into extracts, powders, and juices. It is a strange irony. Europe embraced the American superberry, while America forgot it existed. Only recently have American scientists and growers realized that the new superfruit trending overseas is actually their own native heritage. A pattern of erasure. Today, Aronia is finding its way home. Permaculture designers, regenerative farmers, and homesteaders are planting it because it is the ultimate survival crop. But we must realize that Aronia is just one chapter in a much larger story of lost foods. This pattern repeats constantly in North American history. Amaranth, a sacred high-protein grain, was actually banned in parts of colonial America because it made indigenous populations too self-sufficient. Serviceberries. Once a staple of the prairies, they were swapped out for commercial blueberries bred for shelf life, not nutrition. Elderberries. Ignored for decades until modern virology confirmed their medicinal power. The groundnut, a protein-rich tuber that saved early colonists from starvation, erased because it didn't fit into neat, profitable monoculture rows. Every time a crop offered independence without needing industrial chemicals or patented seeds, the system pushed it aside in favor of something sweeter, weaker, and more profitable. Aronia was abandoned not because it lacked value, but because it didn't fit the economic narrative, the climate-proof solution. Now the rules are changing again. As climate change rewrites the agricultural map, Aronia's flaws are becoming its greatest assets. We are entering an era of chaos, scorching heat followed by deep freezes, droughts followed by floods, and soils ruined by salt and erosion. Most commercial fruit crops are too fragile for this new world. Blueberries are divas. They need perfect soil acidity, constant irrigation, and fungicides. Aronia is a tank. It thrives in the extremes. It produces fruit in a drought and survives standing water. It ignores pests and grows in heavy clay. It is a plant designed by nature for instability. As the old agricultural models fail, a new fruit industry is rising, not based on genetic modification, but on remembering what was already here. Conclusion: today the Aronia berry is growing quietly all across North America. It clings to the edges of wetlands and hides in roadside ditches, surviving without our help. It persists where other crops surrender. The truth is, we never really lost it. We just stopped seeing it. We walked past the most powerful fruit on the continent because it didn't taste like candy. But the world is waking up. If this story reminds you that the solutions we need are often right beneath our feet, hit that like button and share this video. And do yourself a favor, plant 3 Aronia bushes this year. Let them root. Let them spread. The harvest waiting in those dark clusters is more than just fruit. It is a future we almost forgot.